Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Osceola.com's Seminole Sidelines. My name is Nick Carlisle, staff writer and recruiting writer for the Osceola.com, joined by the head editor, Bob Ferrante, on this Monday morning. I got back a couple of hours ago from listening to Norvell talk about, the fourth or fifth day of practice, Bob? We're about that way into Florida State's fall camp, and there's been a couple things in talking to players and coaches that have emerged as some serious storylines and some thoughts on how Florida State is getting off to a good start in terms of their fall practice. But if there's one thing for sure, Bob, I think you and I would wish it would stop raining, because it feels like every time we walk in to talk to Norvell or any assistant coach over the past couple of days, it has consistently been raining outside. So, hey, good for Norvell, I'm sure, who probably doesn't mind it being a little bit wet and humid outside, but for us, not so much. But how are you doing today, Bob? It's feel like forever since I saw you. It's really been such a long time, man.
2 hours, maybe.
2 hours. You've seen a lot of each other recently. But yeah, we just wanted to go through today and talk about some of those major storylines and impressions that have kind of emerged in talking to some choice players and coaches. We've talked to Tony Tokars. We've talked to Chris Thompson, talked to Norvell a couple times. I believe in terms of the players that we've talked to, Omar Graham, Micah Pettis. We got Elijah Moore yesterday. Help me out here, Bob. There's a couple of more. Luke Pettibon. So there's been a good variety, there's been a good variety of players that we've been able to hear from so far. But just want to get your early thoughts on maybe something that stuck out to you from, or maybe a consistent message that we've heard from some of these players and coaches over the first couple of days.
The big one for me all off season has been, what's this team's mindset? Not necessarily team, but the individual mindset, whether you're on the 24 roster, just came in as a transfer. It's a lot of new pieces, a lot of new players, a lot of new assistant coaches. Where does everybody kind of sit, and what's that continuity? What does it look like? I think, we heard from Mike Norvell on Friday with a raspy voice, talking about middle of practice wasn't very good, had to kind of hit the pause button, and really coaches and certain players had to speak up at that time. So I think the big storyline for me really is, okay, leaders, who's emerging, who's holding players accountable. Tony Tokars one day said he's really hearing good words of encouragement from Tommy Castellanos. So it's not just the charisma, it's not just the talking season type of talk from the quarterback, but it is that kind of fired up, need to play better, need to practice harder type of message. There's the James Williams message where I think he said, was it Friday after practice, that he felt like, that's partially on him, that the defensive line wasn't bringing it during the middle part of that practice. So I think when you start to hear players take ownership of these down moments, and typical of every spring, typical of every August, you have bad days, you have bad practice periods. It's hot as what out there, even though they've had a lot of rain. But when things get tough, it really is important to me to hear, okay, who is speaking up? How many guys are speaking up? Ideally, you got at least one or more in each position group, just to kind of keep the guys pushing forward. It's hot, it's hard, but you're starting to show who you are on that practice field, not just as an athlete, but who are you as a person in how you push.
Yeah, I think it's important also to reiterate that we've heard that from a bunch of different players at a bunch of different positions. And what's nice is the one person that we haven't heard that from yet, it's because we haven't talked to him yet since the start of spring camp. Obviously, you talked to him at ACC Media Days in Charlotte, but we haven't heard that from Tommy Castellanos. And, it's the quarterback's job. He's the leader of the offense and more or less the leader of the football team, to hear the accountability, to hear the leadership from other positions, especially along the defensive line. Like, I thought it was really impressive, because I think James was asked roughly about that period of practice, and he wasn't prompted to give a quote about leadership or accountability. That was an unprovoked response from James Williams. I mean, that might just be the kid that he is. That might just be the guy that he is in terms of wanting to be that leader, being accountable. That's not something that I felt like Florida State had last season, especially at the defensive line position. There's a couple of guys there that exactly who we're talking about that probably struggled with that. that type of leadership and accountability that is kind of ever present, and it doesn't have to be dragged and evoked out of you. I think one of the storylines that actually caught my eye today, and it's something that Norvell said. Norvell was asked about relinquishing play calling and what that has allowed for him to do in terms of just being a better head coach. And that was a pretty huge storyline towards the end of last season. Is Norvell willing to give up play calling? Despite what he says publicly, is he internally content with that? Now here we are a couple of weeks ahead of the kickoff game. Norvell gets asked about it again, gives a response saying, I don't get off on calling plays. I'm content and I'm happy to do this. I think that's just an underrated part of this transition in terms of the coaching staff with Florida State, because of course you want to have a new guy come in. You want the offense to be successful. You want Gus to be successful, but you also want Mike to be able to regain control of his program as it is convening off a cliff. You want him to be able to pull for lack of a better term, horse rears, pull them back, get them back on the right track. I was really surprised to hear him be a little bit more candid about that today, in terms of saying, no, I love the game of football. I love coaching these kids. I really do not have to be a part of the play calling process, even though that's how I was brought up. I thought that was an interesting part of today's press conference, Bob.
I think it shows you a glimpse of who Mike Norvell is, who he wants to be as a coach, and just seeing the big picture, seeing that CEO picture. I think we can say that the seeds for this 2025 team, how it would look, how the offense would look, were really sown before kickoff of that Florida game last November, when you heard Gus Malzahn was going to be hired as offensive coordinator. I mean, when that gets out, and it gets out for a reason at that time, it is a oh my type of moment where you start to understand just what Mike Norvell has done and who he's bringing in, the trust that he has in Coach Malzahn. I don't mean this to be a shot at past Florida State coaches. Trust me, we've seen a lot of coaches here and at other schools that cannot give up play calling. They absolutely just cannot. For Mike Norvell, and I think he's going to be pretty active in, hey, Tommy really likes this play call as a quarterback, or he likes that route. Let's see if we can't blend in a little bit more of this. I think it's going to be collaborative, even though Gus is making the play calls, and it's going to be a rhythm as a play caller. It's going to be Gus's kind of decisions. I expect Mike Norvell and Tony Tokars are going to be active there. I think David Johnson's going to be active. I think Herb Hand and Gus Malzahn, having worked together at multiple schools, that's a huge benefit when you have that OL-OC relationship. I think when you start to park egos and you allow football players to find their strengths, I think that's going to be a really, really good thing. How often is that the intangible that translates into better drives and more points? To be seen. But I think that's a real positive. That's a real positive for maybe who these guys are, and understanding, where this team can be successful in the fall.
Question from Sean Jones on Facebook. How is LaWayne McCoy doing? LaWayne hasn't been brought up too much in terms of all the wide receiver talk that has been occurred over the last couple of days or so, but he was mentioned today by Coach Norvell as having a nice couple of catches yesterday. So he is a guy that is really getting a lot of looks, primarily at slot. I think he's a guy that matches up well there. He's somebody that's getting a lot of attention there. Maybe he's not getting the public praise that he deserves in terms of being talking points when, of course, we're talking to Norvell and asking him about specific guys. And, of course, we've already talked to Elijah Moore. We've talked to Deuce Robinson. We've talked to a couple of these wide receivers already. I want to segue that to talk about the wide receivers in general, Bob, because the wide receivers are, apart from your quarterback and your offensive line play, they left a lot to be desired last year. You definitely wanted to see more from them. You brought in guys specifically in the offseason to rectify some of the issues that you were having at wide receiver. And here we are, 5 practices in, and we're hearing good things about the wide receiver group. We're hearing good things about Deuce Robinson and the threat that he can be. That's a story that you wrote that's currently up on the Osceola.com if you want to go and read what Bob had to write about it. We've heard a lot about Squirrel White and what they think he could be coming off of injury. We've heard positive things about Squirrel. We've heard positive things about Deuce. And Deuce, as a leader in that room, is is fantastic as well. We've heard Javon Boggs, true freshman, come up quite often, which is mind-blowing, because you think a true freshman can't really and seriously see the field in his freshman year, can he? But then you go and watch him practice, and he is smooth as a butter, like going through a knife going through butter. Flip that. You got the right sentiment. Bob, how encouraged should we be that we're hearing this many good things about the wide receivers and seeing some good productive coaching from Tim Harris and some good response in terms of the progression of this room? How encouraged should Florida State fans be, or should we still kind of withhold judgment until we actually see a little bit of passing offense on August 30th?
And I think a lot of people are curious, not necessarily is there a Keon Coleman or a Johnny Wilson in this group, but is there a guy who is maybe all ACC caliber? I think when you're hearing about this many guys, you're hearing that the competition is really, really good across the board. First of all, I'll take a Deuce Robinson podcast with Jeremiah Wilson, and maybe don't make me wake up at 5:30 in the morning to listen to it.
No,
but I want those guys talking football, and please inject it into my veins here on August 4th, because I want that. I need that for the next month as we're waiting for these games. I'm very curious about these guys. Like, I think there's a role for a lot of them. For Squirrel, it's probably that all-around guy who can be the slot, who can find openings, maybe isn't the best blocker, he's not the tallest, but there's a role for him. For Deuce, if he can stretch the field, if he can go deep, again, in my story, I was looking back, Deuce has caught passes of 30 or more yards 10 times at Southern Cal. It doesn't sound like a ton, but when you look at how few times Florida State did that in 2024, in the post Keon Johnny year, you need a guy like Deuce who can stretch that field, who can make it easier for you to run, who can make some of those underneath patterns open up a little bit more too, for Randy Pittman too, for the tight ends, for the running backs, the Jalen Lucas types, right? I think there's just a role for a lot of these different receivers, and I'm not saying somebody's going to come up with 50 catches and it's going to be the next Keon, it's going to be a first or second round pick, but it feels like there's that cautious optimism. The competition is going to push these guys for playing time. I think what we knew going in was that Deuce and Squirrel were going to be guys that you felt would be dependable, but you're starting to hear enough about the other guys to feel, okay, Elijah Moore is taking that next step. I think you asked the question the right way. I think you might have asked it to Coach Norvell, but Elijah not enrolling early last year, you lose those spring practices as you're coming in late, and he looked good in camp. Now, he wasn't college ready good,
no,
but just that individual talent looked good. Now you're starting to see him stack these good days, and Mike Norvell praising him. You just see the positivity, the comfortability, I think, again, with so many sophomores, just the 4 sophomores back, you add in Mekhi Danzy as the running back turn receiver, just the variation of options that Florida State now has. I think you feel better about just that competitive push each day toward figuring out who are the best guys to throw out there on the field.
Trenton, one of our YouTube members, thank you so much for continuing to be a member of the Osceola YouTube channel. Trenton, I really wonder if there's anyone special on this roster. We need a few of those that can change games, the playmakers, the guys that come to Florida State to shine, although I'm starting to cringe on that tagline a little bit, because there hasn't been a lot shining, at least in the past 12 months with Florida State football. Not really a question here in terms of the comment from Trenton, which thanks, of course, for contributing to the show. Do you think that there's, like, just at face value, are there any of those guys on that roster, do you think, Bob? Is there a guy that you can pinpoint right now and say that guy is a special player, that is a game wrecker, that is a guy that can change the momentum of a game? Is there anybody that has presented enough to you, or you're confident enough to label them as such without seeing them play football on August 30th?
Yeah, I don't think we'd be out on a really strong branch if we started just naming 4 or 5 guys, because we just haven't seen enough of it day to day in practice. But I think if you look at it as complementary pieces to the big picture, I still think Jalen Lucas, again, we've seen it. Spring camp of last year, the knee looks healthy. that's a guy who I think could be a difference maker. I mean, you're asking Trenton about who can be a difference maker. I honestly think Jalen Lucas is a guy who's going to be tough to cover and wrap up in the open field. That's probably not the sexy answer you're looking for because you're looking for a receiver. Maybe that could be a Deuce Robinson still. I think the question about Deuce, for example, Nick, is like, is that a guy who's going to catch 6 passes a game, or are his 2 passes going to be doubles and home runs that move the ball down the field?
A la Johnny Wilson, he's not gonna get 6 or 7 a game too often, but he's gonna get 2 or 3 like chunk gains, like 15 to 20 yards, crucial third downs. I think Deuce can be that. I think Deuce can be that. In terms of how much, and of course there was a lot of that in the sense that Johnny initially and then Keon later on definitely, I think, became a favorite target for Jordan Travis. We don't know if Tommy leans on one guy or if he's a true ball distributor like that. Of course, that doesn't matter too much in the grand scheme of things. You're going to get your touches when you get your touches, but there's definitely some guy that you're looking for more often than others. And Deuce is a big guy to look for. I want to say with all of my heart, like the fan that is still submerged deep within me wants to believe that Darrell Jackson can be special, wants to believe that what we saw to start last year was not representative of the caliber of player that he can truly be, and that with the right nudging and the right coaching under Terrence Knighton, that he can be a dominant defensive tackle and one of the best in the country. We saw flashes of that from Darrell towards the end of last season. We also saw some things that weren't so great and need to be worked on. I think Darrell Jackson actually absolutely has the potential to be special within him. I think the expectations for Darrell Jackson are for him to be special, both his own personal expectations, Norvell's expectations of him, and Knighton's expectations of him. Can we call him special yet? I think we need to see him take over a game or have a couple of back-to-back stacked either practices or games to where we can truly point and say, okay, the Darrell Jackson that we all perceive or that we all want him to be is now here, and he is the leader that this defense needs. What do you think?
I think we've said to some extent that Darrell Jackson can be as good as he wants to be.
Yes.
He wants to be that guy on Tuesday or Thursday or every Saturday. He can be that guy. It doesn't mean he's going to win double teams consistently. It means he's going to affect the play, and he could be disruptive by taking up 2 blockers and letting somebody around him make a play. I think if you're talking about, I'll throw out an example. Bruce Feldman with The Athletic puts out this freaks list. He's done it for 20 plus years. Mm-hmm. When I'm thinking about, the freaks list came out today, I was thinking who could be on it. Honestly, he picked Mekhi Danzy, but the first guy that came to mind was Darrell Jackson and Amari Williams. You think about those freakishly either sized guys or athletic guys who can be impactful in just different ways that their skills bring to the table. Danzy's just a gift on a different level from a speed sense. Can he be a return type guy? Amari Williams, can he play tight end potentially, and can he play a defensive role that's just kind of new to this Florida State 3-3-5 scheme? It's possible. Darrell Jackson, if he is considerably better on a consistent basis than last year, that will not just be good for him and the guy next to him, but it will light a fire under Daniel Lyons, KJ Sampson, Juju, Kevin Wynn. It's going to light that fire for the next guys. I think that's the legacy of a Jared Verse. It was the legacy of a Jermaine Johnson, that those guys left it all out there, and they wanted to kind of put a roadmap for the next guy to show it. So nobody wants to hear about 2026, what the next guy can do. But if you're making the guys behind you on the depth chart better and you're helping in their development, in their mindset, I think that's massive if Darrell Jackson can be that guy who, again, not super vocal, doesn't really strike you as a mentor type, but through how he carries himself day to day, how he works, that can be a guy who is the the blue collar leader that I think Tony White, Terrence Knighton, this coaching staff, I think they want a guy like that for sure.
Yeah, and it feels like that leadership that you talk about skipped a generation, because you could definitely see it with like a Keir Thomas, Jermaine Johnson, that transcended to Jared Verse and Braden Fisk. Although I think if you ask both of them, they kind of got each other rather than it was a gradual like grandfather effect or a hand-me-down effect in terms of understanding the right way to go about things, the right way to work, the right way to recover, the right way to prepare. Patrick Payton and Marvin Jones Jr. just didn't that jumped a generation, and now you're going to have guys that are hopefully going to come in like the Darrell Jackson, like a James Williams, like some of the other guys that maybe they brought in. Hopefully the right way to do things gets reinstalled into the younger players that have come in. We're going to take a quick commercial break. We're going to continue with some of the storylines and impressions that we've noted and taken down and discussed internally over the last couple of days. We'll see you back again in about 1 minute, 40 seconds. Stay right here on the Osceola.com Seminole Sidelines.
Hey, Seminole fans! Alumni Hall is your ultimate FSU shopping experience and has moved to a new location off Timberlane Road in Tallahassee. Shop FSU gear from Nike, Champion, New Era, Yeti, and more. Alumni Hall has Seminole gear for the entire family, plus accessories and gifts. Spend $150 and you'll earn $10 off your next purchase with their Hall Pass rewards. Stop by their new location on Timberlane Road near REI, or shop anytime online at alumnihall.com. Alumni Hall, where Seminole fans shop.
The Osceola has gone independent, and we want you to join us on the all-new theosceola.com. The Osceola is the place to be for coverage of your favorite FSU sports, as well as the business side of college athletics and your fan experience at Doak Campbell Stadium and around the country. Sign up for the Osceola's daily morning emails. News delivered straight to your inbox 7 days a week. Subscribe to the Osceola for free to get up-to-date news and analysis on everything Florida State. No fluff, no exaggeration, only exactly what you need to know. To get all of the insider knowledge and analysis, upgrade to a paid subscription with 3 different payment options. Take advantage of half-off pricing in July and earn a discount on all Alumni Hall merchandise with your subscription. Annual subscribers get 2 months free, and founder subscriptions earn 2 free memberships to give to friends and family. There's no better time than right now to join the Osceola. Go to www.theosceola.com now to join a leading source for FSU coverage, informing you for over 45 years. And of course, that half off pricing that was in July has been extended into August. Jerry decided to extend that offer. So if you feel like you missed it, you've come in late, now you're trying to get interested in what this Florida State football team can be, you can still take advantage of that half off pricing from July all through the end of August. Bob Ferrante with Nick Carlisle here, second half of the Osceola's Seminole Sidelines on a Monday afternoon, just discussing some of the storylines that we have taken note of through the first 5 practices leading up until their first scrimmage tomorrow night. Their first scrimmage is going to be inside Doak Campbell Stadium. I think it starts around 7 o'clock tomorrow. Of course, we're not going to be able to be there. No fans. It's completely closed. But football is inside Doak Campbell Stadium once again. They didn't get to do that last year as Doak Campbell Stadium was under renovations and has been under renovations for a long time now. They're going to be back inside of Doak Campbell Stadium. Live reps in pads, exactly what you want to be hearing and seeing. Super exciting, and it really is. We take gradual steps in terms of football being back, Bob. This feels like another gigantic step in terms of football being back for this football team. Earlier discussing the leadership of this football team, how it's manifested, the wide receiver room coming on really, really strong. That's something that we've heard consistently. We talked about that earlier in the show. Norvell being more content to run the offense, or to not run the offense rather, and be a head coach. Another storyline that we tackled earlier in the show. Something that we touched on a little bit briefly, Bob, and something that you wrote yesterday. And as you know, of course, we had tight ends coach and deputy head coach Chris Thompson join the media after practice on Sunday. Something that we were kind of interested in, and it's something that I think is super important to a Gus Malzahn offense, is the blocking at tight end. The blocking at tight end in receiver, but specifically the tight ends and how Mike Norvell likes to use them, how Gus likes to use them, how important it is for this iteration of tight ends to up their blocking game. have more dominant bodies in the room. Of course, Bryson Estes switching over from offensive line to tight end. He has continued to work at tight end since the first day of practice. Asked Chris Thompson about that, asked Coach Norvell about that earlier in the week, and essentially the consensus is that he is going to be that big body that comes in multi-tight end sets. They're trying to find a role for a guy, a senior that has been faithful to the program and has stayed the entire time and has been a valuable contributor to the program. Some other tight end news that we kind of just want to talk about here as we talk about the tight ends in general. Landon Thomas, second-year tight end Landon Thomas, has been limited early in practice. He's been practicing a little bit more as of recent, but he has been banged up per Coach Norvell earlier today. Chase Lofton did get dinged up on the first day of practice. Had an ice pack around one of his knees, I believe, as well, but he's been limited as well. So there's been a lot of repetition and a lot of rep for some of the younger guys in the room. And it doesn't feel like Amari Williams is a younger guy when you look at the what year in college he is. Of course, he didn't redshirt last year, but he did jump up a class when he initially committed to Florida State and signed with Florida State. So this is a really young guy that is still learning the position, that's getting a lot of reps at tight end. Bob, how important is it in your mind for this group of tight ends to be dominant blockers? And not to say that there weren't dominant blockers last year, but you had guys that just didn't seem to really be impactful in the running game like you would have hoped, either due to having not as developed bodies in the case of playing true freshmen Landon Thomas and Amari Williams, or guys that just weren't that great at it like Kyle Morlock, Jackson West, and the like.
I think of all of what transpired that we saw in camp last August, we thought the tight ends were going to be good. We thought Kyle Morlock did have good hands in camp, and it never really showed up in any real way the first 6 games until he was essentially benched, and you have to go full on youth movement with Landon Thomas and then Amari Williams. So that was unexpected, right? But I think when you look at this group, they've got a lot of experience under their belt. I think the staff's love of Randy Pittman has kind of, shown through in some of these interviews. Chris Thompson saying that Randy was somebody he drove down to Panama City, saw him play high school football, saw him play high school basketball. A guy that Mike Norvell, he feels, had really loved during the recruiting process, and was probably disappointed to see him not ultimately sign initially. But now to have him after 2 years of development with, Gus Malzahn at UCF, who's now here, it feels very fortuitous to have worked out exactly this way. He is a new transfer, but he also has all of that experience on the field and in the Malzahn offense. I look at potentially blocking to be a strength at tight end, and I feel like I can buy in on this because of Randy Pittman's experience. Marquiston Douglas, that body size, is going to be very good there. Bryson Estes, still not really sure what that snap count is going to look like, or if that's going to be a situational guy. Is that a 3rd down, 4th down extra body who can try to
line fullback type deal,
full line jumbo package? Yeah.
Yep.
But it feels again like, hey, you need big bodies. Okay, well, Florida State's got it. And last year at times when you're, say, 3rd and 1, 4th and a half a yard, near the goal line, whatever, you maybe didn't have the ideal kind of matchups with those bigger bodies. You could have used some of these guys. I'm still curious if the fullback is a guy like Randy Pittman too, is that kind of athletic, versatile guy who could line up in different parts of the field. Can he be that lead blocker type occasionally if you decide to do something there? So it's not sexy, but this is what Mike Norvell did at Memphis, and it worked. It's why some of his offenses really clicked, was they had those versatile tight ends. If some of these guys can provide that, then that's a huge positive. I mean, it may not show up in terms of yards for some of these guys in the box score, but if it's clearing a couple holes, if it's showing up in 3rd down conversion rates or longer drives, improved time of possession for the offense, you can see where some of these positives could add up for Florida State.
Do you think, just blatant answer off the top of your head, do you think we see Amari Williams more at tight end or defensive end this year? If you had to guess.
Man, I lean not because he can't do both. I lean defensive end just because I think there's a little bit of that freakish athleticism for what he can bring over there. If you didn't have Randy Marquiston, all the options at tight end, I could definitely see him going over there. Hey, bottom line, I'm just impressed this guy's trying to do two positions within the same practice.
Yeah.
But it's a darn good question. What are you thinking?
I see. I'm a little bit torn because I think Amari, purely in terms of his physicality, the way that his body is developed, and again, we bring up the fact that he is technically younger. Like, this was a 2026 kid that would be being recruited right now as a cornerstone of this class that reclassified and now has a year of college football under his belt, but may not have been as physically developed. And that's not a knock on Amari Williams, because if you want to look at Amari Williams, the kid is a freakish athlete, and that is something that you definitely want to attribute to him. I think his skill set really allows him to be a pass rushing threat on third down. I don't know how often Florida State is going to be in those true passing situations where it's third and long. You're going to have guys that are going to be able to pin their ears back and go after the quarterback. And if so, is Amari Williams the first guy that you think of on that depth chart, or is Jason Jenkins going to have enough pop or enough zip to get there? James Williams is a very impressive pass rusher at times, but is he going to be a guy that's going to be in for first and second down, and maybe isn't going to have enough juice in the tank to be in there on third down? I think there's a lot of variables to go into play there. I think we probably see him more at tight end, actually, than defensive end. Is it possible that, Florida State's really good at stopping the run and gets into those third and long, third and medium, and you have an obvious passing situation and you can put Amari in and say, go get him? Absolutely. I think it's just more likely that we see him at tight end, and especially if there's some kind of injury in the tight end room, as we reported that Landon's a little bit gimpy right now. Chase Lofton's a little bit gimpy. I don't know. I actually not quite sure did Norvell say whether it was a lower body injury or not with Landon today? I think he just said that he was limited in practice. So anyway, I think we see Amari more at tight end than defensive end. But I absolutely agree with you in the sentiment that it's really impressive that he's trying to do both, because it's certainly not easy. It's certainly exhausting in this heat. And I think it just speaks to his athleticism. Something that I thought was really interesting that Chris Thompson said on Sunday when we talked to him was the chemistry and the coaching side of things, that Norvell has to coach the assistant coaches too. I found that absolutely fascinating, because it's not something, at least, that I really think about. You think, okay, you have your head coaches and your assistant coaches, and they're one hive mind. They're all on the same page. You at least you like to think that they're on the same page. Orders come from the head man, distribute to the rest, and then you just go and you work on it. And especially, you would have said, with the previous staff having mostly worked together all through 5 years without many changes, you would have said, okay, that chemistry is down pat. Now there's a bunch of new coaches in here. Coach Chris Thompson said that they were on the road recruiting January, February. They weren't really here. They saw these kids during spring practice. Then they were back on the road recruiting in April and May. They were here over the summer, and now they're finally getting a chance to really dig into the personality of their rooms, dig into how each guy, especially new guy that's coming in, likes to be coached, what pushes them, what motivates them. But they're also learning how to coach this iteration of their room, and they're getting advice from Norvell on how to coach that room, and they're getting advice from Norvell on how to coach each other and be with each other. I thought that was absolutely fascinating, because you don't really think about it. You think about head coach to player, assistant coach to player, and rarely do you think of head coach to position coach. What did you make of his comments?
Yeah, I tend to think of Norvell in the past years as he was always going to be focused on receivers and kind of that offensive coordinator mindset. He always kind of felt like he was going to settle into, hey, I'm going to run down there with the receivers and encourage or coach or yell or whatever. Now to hear that, okay, candidly, Chris Thompson was one of Mike Norvell's coaches back at Central Arkansas back in the day. To think that Mike Norvell is coaching Chris Thompson maybe makes me smile. It's a little bit of an interesting wrinkle in those relationships. But I think
you can say the same thing for Gus as well.
You're comfortable in your own skin. I would hope that works out for these guys. I think to have these UCF coaches together, they know how each other wants to do their jobs day to day. I think it can be tough for a coach maybe to challenge another coach, and maybe they won't do that on the practice field in front of a player. But I think behind closed doors, I can say, well, coach, why are you doing that? Or why do you think that's going to work? Why is this player suited on this player in this scheme or whatnot? I think there can be that back and forth because there's a healthy amount of respect for each other. And I'm using that offensively as an example, but you could flip it to the defense. You've got these coaches who are at Nebraska together between, White and Knighton and Cooper. I think the Knighton-Odell relationship, something Jerry Cutts wrote about last week, is just really something you have to appreciate, that they can really respect who each other is as a coach, on and off the field. And I think there's just lots of different intangibles. I think I've used that word a lot today because we're talking about leadership and accountability and coaching relationships and intangibles. But this is the time of year where you build some of these stronger relationships so that in September, October, November, you just have the established relationships and respect there, so that it's not a challenge. It's a conversation over what can we do here? What should we do? Why are you thinking that? And it's not a challenge. It's just a conversation about what's best for the team. So I think that can be healthy, now, and it can pay off down the road.
One of the final topics I want to discuss today is the offensive line, and I don't think you need to tell any Florida State fan how important it is for this offensive line to have a rebound year. That is the number one thing. If we're bulletin boarding, number one priority, or number one, the word is escaping me, but the number one priority in terms of what this Florida State team needs to have success is improved offensive line play. We've spoken to Luke Pettibon. Now, we spoke to Micah Pettis earlier today, who said that Coach Hand is coaching him some of the best as he's ever received in his entire career, which he's a redshirt senior. It's his final year of eligibility. I think the conversation about Florida State's offensive line is that Florida State wants to believe that they have a renewed and rejuvenated offensive line. They have the pieces that they think are going to be able to work together and work together well. It's just a matter of putting it all together when it counts and having that chemistry be built. And that was something that was a little bit tested in the spring. A number of guys out with injuries during the spring. So far, so good for the offensive line through 5 practices, Bob. It seems like everything is meshing well and going well. And I asked Micah today about some of the problems that going against Tony White's defense presents. And obviously, they're going to be facing base defense. They're going to be facing a whole bunch of different types of defenses. But the ability to adjust their protections and understand and shift protection and do what they need to do, it seems like they're off to a good start. What's your impressions of not only Luke's comments earlier last week, but what Micah had to say about his room, protecting Tommy Castellanos, and just the chemistry that they've been able to build over the last 6 months or so?
I think it's got to be frustrating looking back on it that you couldn't expedite the continuity in the spring. But now to have guys, we'll use the term healthy in relative terms and in air quotes, right? You have guys who are healthy enough to go out there day to day and fight through the bumps and bruises. But to be able to build that continuity, I think that's, like you said, offensive line play is the number one priority. How do you get there? It's through that day-to-day continuity. It's, Luke Pettibon looking to his right and left and trusting that guy. And then the tackles, feeling comfortable about what they're doing. I thought what Micah Pettis said was interesting too, is that he feels really good and that they're on the right track, but you're also in that transfer portal era where there's always going to be a change in personnel. Like he even felt that way at Ole Miss, that, you didn't have that same offensive line every single year. It's almost like an NFLization to bastardize a word. You're professionalizing the roster by having that type of changeover. So you have to have a mindset of building cohesion every spring, every camp. I don't know whether I'm fully willing to buy into this just yet, because you're 5 practices in. We haven't heard about a scrimmage yet, haven't really seen the tangible results, especially when you say going back to the spring, there were so many guys injured. I can just say I think there's pieces of positivity. When you hear as much, and you can read the tea leaves on what Mike Norvell and Herb Hand say about Luke Pettibon as a leader and how much they love how he's built and how he's wired. I don't know if I've said this on the show, but to me, Luke Pettibon sounds a little bit like a Brian Stork type, that kind of undersized, chip on the shoulder center, that ultra leader, doesn't really care about anything else that's said or spoken about from the outside. He's just all about the work and putting the guys out there on the field to be working hard toward sustaining plays, towards sustaining drives and getting points. I think you see guys like that. I think you just see that workmanlike mindset. Again, you can't expedite this. They did lose that time in the spring. It's a huge bummer, but the early steps I think have been really, really positive. And that's probably the one thing I'm curious to hear, late Tuesday night when Mike Norvell talks, is just how did that offensive line look like in these kind of early 1-versus-1 type matchups with that defensive front? Just how were they able to hold up?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's going to be the thing, is that tomorrow you're getting scrimmage. You're playing football. There's practice football, and then there's competing football when you're playing when you're playing live reps, live to a T. Obviously, quarterbacks are hands off, as they should be. But there's going to be a lot that's going to come out of tomorrow's scrimmage that I think a lot of people are going to be interested to ask Coach Norvell and the coordinators just how everything went, their thoughts on everything. And, of course, we'll be back later in the week to cover a lot of that in terms of what they said, what we're hearing, as always. Thank you so much for listening to the Osceola.com Seminole Sideline, as always. Thank you so much for your continued support. Remember, the half-off pricing for the Osceola.com has been extended through August. So make sure that you take advantage of that deal. Give the content a chance. I think that you'll like what you find from the new and improved the Osceola.com in terms of what we're being able to provide and some of the cool things that we're being able to do. The light has changed in my room dramatically. I don't know if you noticed that. We're about to get ready to get another rainstorm. So in lieu of losing some power, that'll do it for today. Thank you so much for your viewership and for your readership, your support, as always. My name is Nick Carlisle. That's Bob Ferrante, head editor of the Osceola.com, and we will see you all back on the Osceola's Seminole Sidelines very soon. Thank you so much.